The Real News. I'm Ben Norton. Mike Pompeo, the hawkish former director of the CIA, has now been sworn in as the new U.S. Secretary of State. On one of his first trips in April, Pompeo visited Saudi Arabia. While meeting with Saudi regime officials in the capital Riyadh, Pompeo called Iran, quote, the greatest sponsor of terrorism in the world. Pompeo then visited Israel, where he praised the extreme right-wing government as it is massacring unarmed protesters in the illegally besieged Gaza Strip. The U.S. Secretary of State refused to criticize the Israeli military for intentionally shooting children and journalists in Gaza. Pompeo's trip to Saudi Arabia and Israel also came at a time when an Israeli journalist leaked comments Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman made during his recent trip to the United States. In a meeting with pro-Israel leaders, the Saudi Crown Prince condemned the Palestinians for not acquiescing to deals offered by the U.S. government. Mohammed bin Salman said, quote, it is about time the Palestinians take the proposals and agree to come to the negotiation table or shut up and stop complaining. That is the Crown Prince telling the Palestinians to shut up or stop complaining. Joining us to discuss the political dynamics between the U.S., Saudi Arabia, and Israel-Palestine is Asad AbuKhalil. Asad is a leading expert on Middle East politics and a professor of political science at California State University, Stanislaus. He also regularly writes at his website, the Angry Arab News Service. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Ben.
So can you respond? There are a few things we can address here, but first of all, let's just begin. One of Pompeo's first trips was to Saudi Arabia, in which he and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman agreed to increase this aggressive action against Iran. Can you respond?
Well, I think that it's fair to say that the destination of foreign trips by the president and now by the new secretaries of state indicate the priorities of the foreign policy agenda of the administration. Saudi Arabia and Israel basically now dictate U.S. foreign policy in the region and even beyond on the question of terrorism. They get to decide who is terrorist and who's not. The U.S. government is basically engaged in a trade-off with the Saudi government. The Saudis, on the one hand, buy a lot of the weapons from the United States, weapons they don't even know, they don't need, they don't have the skills to be utilized yet, and so on. And they also invest heavily in the United States, and they pay for America's wars in Syria and elsewhere. In return, the United States, I mean, this is a very blatant trade-off that Trump is all too willing to explain to the American public, even on Twitter. In return, they will get their wars defended, the regime protected, and also their foreign policy priorities respected by the U.S. government. The Israelis, however, have become the closest allies of Saudi Arabia. This twin alliance of Israel and Saudi Arabia is very much responsible for much of the bloodshed going on in the Middle East region. And they are also setting the tone of what is left of the so-called peace process, which is basically going to be imposed by force on the Palestinian population. And the remarks that were leaked by the Crown Prince during his visit here is only an indication that he wants to force the Palestinians not only to accept conditions that do not meet the minimum standards of the Palestinians, even the West Bank and Gaza, and even the Palestinian Authority, this collaborationist regime that the US and Israel set up in Ramallah, but also they have to accept to relocate, to define Jerusalem in a way whereby a suburb outside of Jerusalem will be renamed as if it is Jerusalem. I mean, this is like magical tricks that are being done as if to deceive the Palestinian people that they will have Jerusalem when they don't have it.
Yeah, and let's talk more about Mohammed bin Salman. He recently took a trip to the United States for 2 weeks in which he met with not just Trump, but also many other prominent politicians. He met with Bill Clinton, also a lot of business leaders, and I reported here at The Real News on a summit called the Saudi-US CEO Forum, in which they signed billions of dollars of deals between American and Saudi companies. However, none of this is necessarily surprising. What was interesting and is, as you mentioned, a new hallmark of this kind of open collaboration we've seen between Saudi Arabia and Israel, which has gone on for years, but under Mohammed bin Salman has become very explicit. We saw that when he was here in the U.S., Mohammed bin Salman gave a speech to a meeting with several pro-Israel leaders from a lot of pro-Israel groups here in the U.S. That's the meeting in which he made these comments, which were leaked by Barak Ravid, the Israeli journalist. Barak Ravid reported that some people in the audience literally fell out of their chairs because they were so surprised how openly pro-Israel Mohammed bin Salman is. Can you talk about the Crown Prince and his policy toward the Palestinians?
I think that there are no limits to how far the Saudi regime, current Saudi regime, is going to go in order to enforce the Israeli agenda on the Palestinian Arab population. The only thing is, I mean, you cannot force something on the aspiration of a population like the Palestinian people who have been fighting for over a century for their rights and statehood and right to return. But what is also interesting, and this is totally missing from the Western media, because the Western media is entirely enamored with the Crown Prince, and they often regurgitate propaganda from the Saudi media on Syria, on Yemen, and elsewhere on the region into Western media. Often they translate some of their conspiracy theories and so on. But what I also need to emphasize is that if you look closely at Saudi regime media, as I do, you will find that there are two currents simultaneously going on. On the one hand, there's a clear attempt to diminish, reduce the passion for Palestinians among the Saudi population. Not that this is successful, because the Saudi people are really extremely passionate about their identification with the Palestinian cause. But they also are simultaneously continuing to propagate anti-Semitic conspiracy theories in their media. Just today, I was reading an article in a Riyadh newspaper, which is a grotesque anti-Semitic explanation of the world economy, basically being traced to one Jewish family and so on.
Yeah, and we have to wrap up in a moment here, but I wonder if you can briefly comment. We've seen this even in the U.S. media, where Mohammed bin Salman and other Saudi officials will spread openly anti-Semitic comments, some of which have also been echoed by Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, who recently, 2 years ago, blamed the Holocaust on the Palestinian Mufti, not on Hitler. But we've seen that recently, for instance, Mohammed bin Salman did an interview with the Atlantic editor, Jeffrey Goldberg, who himself previously served in the IDF. And in this interview, Mohammed bin Salman claimed that the Ayatollah in Iran made Hitler look like a good guy. So we've seen that, we see consistently the Saudi Crown Prince whitewashes the Holocaust and says that his enemies make Hitler look like he was a good guy. Can you respond to that?
Yes, I mean, that's worth exploring, because I've been arguing for many years that Israel's best friends in the Arab world have always been, throughout the conflict, rabid anti-Semites and Nazis, from Anwar Sadat, who was an unrepentant Nazi anti-Semite, to Mahmoud Abbas, who was a Holocaust denier. The best friends, or to the Phalange in Lebanon, the best friends of Israel have always been anti-Semites. So this is not an accident at all. If anything, you can argue, it is in the minds of these anti-Semites that they have this conception, this kooky conception based on the Protocols of the Elder of Zion and other trash of anti-Semitic literature. And they understand the world through these conspiracies, and they think if we can make peace with the state of Israel, who control the world, then we can enhance our situation in our region or in the world. So this is not surprising at all, and you see reflections of that in the Saudi media.
Well, unfortunately, we'll have to end it there, but thanks for providing your insight. We were joined by Asad AbuKhalil, who is a leading expert on Middle East politics and a professor of political science at California State University, Stanislaus. Thanks for joining us, Asad.
Thank you very much, Ben.
Reporting for The Real News, I'm Ben Norton.